While Luffy is likely to fight Fleet Admiral Akuinu one day, there will also be 2 remaining admirals at the end of the story that need to be defeated as well, with Zoro likely fighting Ryukogyu and Sanji fighting Kizaru. So probably not the first you've ever heard of this matchup spread. We've all thought about ideas of how the monster trio may one day go up against the admirals, but with the introduction of the final admiral, Ryukogyu, I think we got some final clues that mean we can possibly lock in this setup of Luffy versus Akuinu, Zoro versus Ryukogyu, and Sanji versus Kizaru as the most likely final matchups. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos every week, and subscribe to Grand Line Review and Sensei Inc. because the raid succeeded. And make sure you're eating a delicious meal while you watch this video, like for example HelloFresh, this video's sponsor. Do you want healthy, delicious meals delivered straight to your door? With HelloFresh, you're getting home-cooked meals that you can choose yourself out of 50 weekly menu items. They are delivered straight to you. So no grocery shopping, no time wasted looking up recipes. Everything is set up and ready to go, so you can make your meal in less than 20 minutes. Ever since I started using HelloFresh, my life has honestly become a lot easier. Now I don't have to stress about what I'm making for dinner, whether it's healthy, whether I'm sticking to my fitness goals. I'm not having to spend an hour cooking after a long day of work, and I hardly ever have to go to the grocery store anymore. Not to mention the meal options cater to literally everyone, so you can get the fit and wholesome package, or you can get family friendly, or meat and veggie, or just vegetarian. There are great packages for whatever type of food you want to eat. I myself just cooked up a great Southwest beef cavatappi that I'm going to be eating for the next couple of days. So if you're tired of cooking and grocery shopping, if you want to have healthy, delicious meals that require basically zero effort, then get your HelloFresh today. Just go to HelloFresh.com and use code MrMorge16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Literally 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, is it even fair to expect the monster trio to fight the admirals? Is Luffy even going to be fighting Akuinu in the endgame? Or is it possible that Luffy already has enough to deal with Blackbeard and possibly Im waiting for him? After all, many believe that Sabo will be taking on Akuinu instead in order to avenge Ace's death. Here's the thing. I think that it is very, very difficult to imagine a world where anyone other than Luffy defeats Akuinu. Because first of all, the same reason that you might believe Sabo will fight Akuinu, avenging Ace's death, is the exact same reason that Luffy would have to fight Akuinu, except for the one major difference being that Luffy was literally actually there when Akuinu murdered Ace in front of his eyes. Actually, no, wait, Luffy was actually there when Akuinu murdered Ace in front of his eyes, as Ace sacrificed himself to save Luffy from Akuinu. And maybe most importantly, Luffy is the main character of the story who pretty much always, without fail, gets the most important villain. And Akuinu is, without question, the most personal vendetta Luffy has in the entire series. I think a lot of people forget or undersell just how important and deep-rooted the Luffy-Akuinu animosity is, as it very arguably goes even deeper than Luffy and Blackbeard. Throughout the entire story, Akuinu is the only character that Luffy clearly has a deep-seated grudge against, to the point where even the mere mention of his name enrages him. Just hearing the name Akuinu angers Luffy, which is not a reaction that Luffy shows when discussing other enemies such as Crocodile or even Blackbeard. That's because what Akuinu did to Luffy, as the only man in the entire series to break Luffy's spirit, and make Luffy experience the pain of failing to protect a loved one, actually killing them in front of his eyes. That is something unique to Akuinu that he has over Luffy that no other antagonist compares to. And that has clearly stuck with Luffy in a way that no other antagonist has stuck with him. Even just seeing the way Luffy clutches his scar at the mention of Akuinu, that in itself is something that people completely gloss over, which is that Luffy's experience with Akuinu has literally scarred him. It has changed him permanently, and Luffy hasn't forgotten. And it should also be noted that an interesting recurring idea throughout One Piece is that often, characters that leave scars on one another seem to be fated to one day fight again. For instance, the earliest example was Mihawk leaving a scar on Zoro. And of course, after that encounter, we know that Zoro has basically sworn to one day get to the point where he can one day fight and defeat Mihawk. That scar that Mihawk left on Zoro is in some ways a constant reminder of the final goal that Zoro must eventually reach, a rematch that must one day inevitably happen. Similarly, we have the scar that Blackbeard left on Shanks, a scar that still bothers Shanks. It's a constant reminder for him of someone that he holds a strong vendetta against, Blackbeard. I mean, Shanks is pretty vocal about the feelings that he has that are tied to this scar. And similarly, we can see that Shanks and Blackbeard's fates seem to be, in some ways, destined to one day meet again in an inevitable rematch, and both seem intent on seeing that through. So we have Shanks and Blackbeard, Zoro and Mihawk, characters that still hold on to a signature scar from another character, and a fated rematch that we can expect from these pairs of characters. And the final and most prominent scar that we have in One Piece is Luffy's, the scar on his chest from Akuinu. And again, the same feelings Luffy seems to have towards Akuinu, anger and clutching his scar when he thinks of him. I mean, that's pretty similar to what we see from Shanks and Blackbeard. Obviously, we don't have a ton of examples of scars to talk about in the series, but it's just interesting to me that of the most notable ones we can think of, there is already a bit of an established trend that these characters are looking for an eventual rematch with the person that left their mark on them. And beyond that, I think Luffy vs Akuinu just has a certain inevitability to it, as Pirates vs Marines was really one of the fundamental core conflicts from the start of the series. These two are opposite sides of the spectrum. Pirates and Marines are just natural enemies. That was something we understood from day one. And obviously throughout the story, the Straw Hats have continually fought the Marines many a time, in between taking on other pirates. I just personally feel like seeing the Straw Hats as the greatest pirate crew in the world, having that eventual final showdown with the Marines, who have hounded them and chased them for so long, feels right. And just natural that the Pirate King versus the Fleet Admiral of the Marines, with Luffy the embodiment of freedom, and Akuinu his opposite as the figure of absolute, rigid, inflexible justice, is something that feels right for the endgame of the story. I've always said that if Blackbeard represents a sinister, twisted version of what Luffy stands for, then Akuinu is the more blatantly clear-cut opposite of what Luffy stands for. And I think a lot of the framing of Marineford portrayed these two antagonists in that manner. Obviously, other highly anticipated matchups can still happen, but considering the history of Luffy and Akuinu, the symbolism of Pirates versus Marines, and what Luffy and Akuinu both represent, I do think that this is one final matchup that is very likely for Luffy. So with all that being said, what about Zoro and Sanji? If we have Luffy versus Akuinu as an extremely likely matchup, well, the absolute constant throughout the series has been that the boss's right and left-hand men are defeated by Zoro and Sanji. Hachi and Kurobi, Mr. 1 and Mr. 2, King and Queen. Anywhere you look, that's pretty much what you can expect. And I do think that by the end of the series, Akuinu will of course be Fleet Admiral, but he may only have 2 admirals beneath him at that point, Rikogyu and Kizaru. 2 powerful subordinates, his right and left-hand men, for Zoro and Sanji to defeat. Why do I leave Fujitora out of this? Well, for a long time, many believed that Fujitora would fight Zoro. This is because most assumed from the start that Sanji would fight Kizaru, and therefore Fujitora would naturally just be left for Zoro. I tend to agree that if Zoro and Sanji are going to get to fight admirals, then Kizaru would be the natural opponent for Sanji. After all, Sanji's fighting style is characterized by speed and powerful kicks, and Kizaru is basically that, but taken to the extreme, moving at the speed of light, and basically having the strongest kicks in the world. Not to mention, a lot of readers expect that the only way to even keep up with Kizaru would be with extremely strong observation haki, and that is supposedly Sanji's specialty out of the monster trio. Kizaru just always seemed like the perfect matchup for him. But then, would that mean that Fujitora would fight Zoro? A swordsman that Zoro has already clashed with multiple times? That never quite seemed right to me, as it's difficult to imagine Fujitora fighting for the world government side in the endgame. Fighting against the Dawn, fighting against freedom, fighting on the side of oppression. As we see over the course of Dressrosa, that Fujitora does not blindly follow orders. He always chooses to fight for the side that he believes to be true justice. And he will in fact openly bet on and aid pirates if that's what he believes to be correct. More than any other Marine we've seen in the story, Fujitora will openly and blatantly ignore orders in favor of his own judgment, and we repeatedly see him going against Akuinu and his establishment. It is difficult for me to imagine that in the final war, when everyone is fighting against the oppression of the world government, that Fujitora would judge that Akainu's side is the correct one to be on, especially if the world government carries out that great cleansing that was teased. I think that it also may have been deliberate on Oda's part to make sure that out of the new roster of 3 admirals, one of them would be a defector by the endgame, as that neatly sets up the usual scenario of Luffy taking on the boss while Zoro and Sanji get the 2 remaining high-ranking subordinates. Obviously, we now have other strong characters like Jinbei and potentially even Yamato on the crew, but unless Yamato is confirmed, I'm not going to speculate on potential matchups for her. And more importantly, over the course of the Onigashima War, the one thing that seemed to be repeatedly stressed was that it seems like no matter how the crew grows, the 2 wings of the crew, the right and left hand of the Pirate King, are Zoro and Sanji, and ultimately they were the only 2 Straw Hats that fought calamities, while the rest, including Jinbei, were deliberately given the lower ranking Tobi-Roppo. So looking at the Admirals, if we have Luffy against Akuinu, and Sanji seems to be a good fit against Kizaru, and Fujitora may not even make sense as an enemy in the future, then luckily with Ryukogyu's appearance, it seems as though the perfect opponent for Zoro has appeared. Unlike Fujitora, this character seems to be blatantly in line with the Marines and Akainu's way of doing things, meaning Ryukogyu and Kizaru can both reasonably be expected to be standing against the Straw Hats in the final war. On top of that, Ryukogyu's a swordsman, which we know is always a good sign for a Zoro opponent, and he's immediately established to be extremely strong, seemingly easily defeating the calamities. And lastly, this may be trivial, but it just seems somewhat fitting, the color schemes line up nicely, with Luffy and Akuinu obviously both being characterized by red, Zoro and Green Bull by green, and Sanji and Kizaru by yellow. And beyond that, as a little bonus, I think it's possible we may get to see the rest of the Straw Hats matched up against Vice Admirals. I don't know if Oda would ever devote full chapters to fights against Vice Admirals, but during the Marineford War, it was interesting to see that while Whitebeard's strongest commanders, Marco and Jozu, took on the Admirals, all of Whitebeard's weaker commanders were basically lining up against Vice Admirals. So maybe we get to see some of that play out during the final war as well. For instance, maybe we get to see Jinbei getting some payback against Strawberry for what happened to Fisher Tiger, and other little battles like that, though who knows how much space Oda will have to include those matchups in such a huge war. But let me know in the comments below if you agree with the matchups I listed, and if you can think of some interesting matchups for the other Straw Hats against Marines, Vice Admirals, etc. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon to get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics. And check out my new channel, Morge Unleashed, to get my unfiltered thoughts straight from streams. Someone's unsheathing their sword. Alright, Daimyo of Udon. Alright, Daimyo of Ringo. Oh, it's fucking Zoro. It's fucking the Daimyo of Ringo is fucking Zoro. Oh wait, it's Zoro, but he looks a little bit older. But it's still fucking clearly Zoro. Who the fuck is this guy? Why the fuck would you include this if it's not gonna lead to anything? What the fuck is this? What Zoro plot thread would I want resolved? It's not even like I want this resolved. I'm just like, this is fucking bizarre. What the fuck is this? This is just Zoro.